The champagne flute slipped from my trembling fingers, crystal shards scattering across the polished marble floor of the Riverside Country Club as Ryan's cruel laughter echoed through the reception hall. Maybe if Emma spent less time playing doctor and more time actually trying to be a woman, she'd have given us a niece or nephew by now instead of just being the family disappointment. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. His words cut through the celebratory chatter like a blade, silencing the christening reception as every eye turned toward me. Baby Lily slept peacefully in Jessica's arms, blissfully unaware that her father had just delivered the cruelest blow of my 32 years of life. The irony wasn't lost on me that Ryan chose this moment, surrounded by family and friends celebrating his perfect new daughter, to remind everyone of my greatest failure. I stood frozen in my navy dress, the same one I'd worn to 3 other christenings in the past 2 years, watching the pity creep into the faces around me. My sister Jessica's cheeks flushed crimson as she shifted baby Lily to one arm and reached toward me with the other, her mouth opening to defend me. But the damage was done. The secret I'd been hiding for 18 months sat heavy in my chest, threatening to burst free as I stared at the man who had just humiliated me in front of 40 guests. What Ryan didn't know, what none of them knew, was that the beautiful baby girl he was so proudly showing off wasn't actually his daughter at all. My name is Emma Richardson, and I should probably start by telling you that I'm not the woman my family thinks I am. For the past 5 years, I've been the dedicated wife struggling with infertility, the sister who smiles through baby showers while quietly breaking inside, the daughter who nods politely when relatives ask, when David and I are finally going to give them some good news. I've perfected the art of deflecting questions about children with practiced responses about timing and when it's meant to happen, all while scheduling my life around ovulation windows and hormone injections that leave me feeling like a stranger in my own body. But there's another side to my story that no one in my family knows about, a professional life that exists in stark contrast to the personal struggles that define me in their eyes. While they see Emma the fertility patient, the woman whose body has betrayed her dreams of motherhood, I spend my days as Dr. Emma Richardson, one of Riverside General Hospital's most respected reproductive endocrinologists. The irony is cruel and constant. I help other women achieve the pregnancies that continue to elude me, celebrating their victories while fighting my own private war against a condition that has stolen so many dreams. The morning of baby Lily's christening began like most Sundays in our household, with David bustling around the kitchen making his famous blueberry pancakes while I sat at our breakfast table reviewing patient files. Our home in the Willowbrook subdivision was modest compared to Jessica and Ryan's sprawling estate in Riverside Heights, but it suited us perfectly, with its cozy reading nook by the bay window and the nursery we'd optimistically decorated 3 years ago that now served as my home office. "You're working again," David observed, sliding a plate in front of me without judgment. After 8 years of marriage, he'd learned to recognize the signs when I needed the distraction of work to manage whatever emotional challenge lay ahead. Today's challenge was watching my sister celebrate the 6-month milestone of effortless motherhood, while I prepared for another month of negative pregnancy tests. "Just reviewing Mrs. Patterson's charts," I replied, though we both knew it was Sunday and Mrs. Patterson's appointment wasn't until Tuesday. "Her hormone levels are finally stabilizing after the miscarriage. I think we might be able to try again next cycle." David settled into the chair across from me, his kind eyes holding the gentle concern that had sustained me through countless disappointments. "And how are your hormone levels doing today?" he asked, code for checking whether I was emotionally prepared for the afternoon's festivities. I set down my fork and really looked at my husband for the first time that morning. At 34, David still had the boyish charm that had attracted me during our residency days, though lines of worry had appeared around his eyes over the past few years. As a pediatric surgeon, he understood the medical complexities of our situation better than most spouses would, but that knowledge somehow made our struggles more frustrating rather than less. We both knew exactly what wasn't working and why, which left little room for the comforting delusions that sustained other couples through fertility treatments. "I'm fine," I said automatically, then caught his raised eyebrow. "Okay, I'm not fine, but I'm prepared. Jessica needs us there, and baby Lily deserves to be celebrated regardless of my personal issues." "Your personal issues?" David repeated slowly. Emma, infertility isn't a character flaw. It's a medical condition that affects 1 in 8 couples. You know this better than anyone. I did know this. Intellectually, at least. I delivered this exact speech to hundreds of patients over the years, explaining that fertility struggles were nobody's fault, and certainly nothing to be ashamed of. But knowing something professionally and accepting it personally are entirely different challenges, especially when your brother-in-law takes every opportunity to remind you of your failures. Ryan Martinez had been making subtle digs about our childless marriage since he and Jessica got engaged 4 years ago. At first, his comments were couched in humor, little jokes about David and me being the fun aunt and uncle who could travel wherever we wanted because we didn't have kids to worry about. But as the years passed and Jessica announced her pregnancy while David and I continued our fertility treatments, Ryan's remarks became increasingly pointed. He seemed to take personal pleasure in highlighting the contrast between their growing family and our empty nest. "Do you think he knows?" I asked David as we prepared to leave for the church, smoothing my dress in front of our bedroom mirror. "About the treatments, I mean." Jessica promised she wouldn't tell him, but sometimes I wonder if he's guessing based on how we react to his comments. David adjusted his tie with more force than necessary. "Even if he knows, that doesn't give him the right to be cruel about it. Your sister needs to have a conversation with her husband about boundaries." I almost laughed at the suggestion. Jessica had been apologizing for Ryan's behavior for years, making excuses about his stress at work or his Mediterranean temperament, anything to avoid acknowledging that she'd married a man who seemed to enjoy inflicting emotional pain on others. The truth was that Jessica had always been conflict-averse, preferring to smooth over uncomfortable situations rather than address them directly. It was a quality that had served her well in childhood but had become problematic in her marriage to a man who interpreted kindness as weakness. St. Michael's Church was already filling with guests when we arrived, the late morning sun streaming through stained glass windows and casting colorful patterns across the wooden pews. Jessica stood near the altar holding baby Lily, who was dressed in the family christening gown that had been worn by 3 generations of our family's children. My sister looked radiant in a flowing cream dress that flattered her post-pregnancy figure, her auburn hair styled in loose waves that framed her face perfectly. "Emma," she called out, carefully navigating toward us while balancing the baby and managing her dress. "I'm so glad you're here. Lily's been fussy all morning, and I was starting to worry she'd cry through the entire ceremony." I accepted my sister's one-armed hug and peered down at my niece, who was indeed wide awake and alert despite the early morning preparations. Baby Lily had Jessica's green eyes, but none of the Martinez family's distinctive features that were so prominent in Ryan's face. Instead, she had delicate bone structure and an almost ethereal quality that reminded me of someone I couldn't quite place. "She's beautiful, Jess," I said sincerely, allowing myself a moment to appreciate the miracle of new life without the usual stab of envy. "How are you feeling about today?" "Nervous, excited, grateful," Jessica rattled off, bouncing gently to keep Lily content. "Mom's been driving me crazy with details all week, and Ryan's family kept changing the guest count for the reception, but we made it through the chaos." Ryan appeared beside us as if summoned by the mention of his name, dressed impeccably in a charcoal suit that probably cost more than David's monthly salary. As a successful real estate developer, Ryan had always enjoyed displaying his wealth through expensive clothes, cars, and the sprawling house he'd built for Jessica in the most exclusive neighborhood in Riverside. He kissed my cheek in greeting, a gesture that had always felt performative rather than genuine. "Emma, David, thanks for coming," he said with the practiced charm he employed in business dealings. "I know how busy you both are at the hospital saving lives, and all that important medical stuff." There was something in his tone that immediately put me on guard, a subtle mockery disguised as respect that made my stomach clench with anticipation. Ryan had perfected the art of delivering insults wrapped in compliments, leaving his targets unsure whether they'd actually been attacked or were simply being oversensitive. "We wouldn't miss Lily's big day," David replied smoothly, either missing or choosing to ignore Ryan's tone. "She's lucky to have such devoted parents." Ryan's smile widened, and I recognized the expression that always preceded his most cutting remarks. "Well, some of us are just naturally gifted at the whole parenting thing, I guess. It's all about knowing what you're meant for in life. The comment was clearly directed at me, a not-so-subtle reference to my inability to conceive, but before I could respond, Pastor James approached our group to discuss the ceremony logistics. Ryan immediately shifted into his public persona, all charm and enthusiasm, as he discussed his daughter's spiritual journey with the elderly minister. I watched him perform this transformation with fascination, wondering how someone could switch between cruelty and charisma so effortlessly. The christening ceremony itself was beautiful and mercifully brief. Baby Lily remained calm throughout the proceedings, even seeming to enjoy the attention, as Pastor James spoke about her place in the community of faith and her parents' commitment to raising her with love and guidance. I found myself studying her features during the quiet moments, still unable to shake the feeling that something about her appearance didn't quite fit with either parent. Jessica had Ryan's dark hair and olive complexion, while Ryan himself had the strong jaw and prominent nose that characterized the Martinez family lineage. But baby Lily had fair skin, delicate features, and an almost aristocratic bone structure that seemed to come from somewhere else entirely. I dismissed these observations as the over-analytical tendencies of someone who spent too much time examining genetic factors in fertility cases. After the ceremony concluded and Pastor James had offered his final blessings, the guests began making their way to the Riverside Country Club for the reception. The venue was Jessica's choice, a decision that had sparked several arguments with Ryan's mother, who preferred more traditional celebrations. But Jessica had always loved the club's elegant ballroom, with its crystal chandeliers and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the golf course. The reception was already in full swing when David and I arrived, having stopped at home to change clothes and give ourselves a mental break before facing several hours of family socializing. The country club had transformed the ballroom with white linen, silver accents, and centerpieces of white roses and babies. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Breath that perfectly complemented the christening theme. A string quartet played softly in one corner, while guests mingled over cocktails and hors d'oeuvres. I immediately spotted my parents holding court near the bar. My mother Margaret gesturing animatedly as she regaled a group of relatives with stories about baby Lily's recent milestones. My father Tom stood beside her with his characteristic patient smile, occasionally nodding or adding details to her narrative. They'd been married for 37 years and had developed a comfortable rhythm in social situations, with my mother providing the entertainment and my father offering quiet support. "Emma, sweetheart," my mother called out as soon as she noticed our arrival. "Come meet your cousin Patricia's new boyfriend. He's a doctor too, actually a cardiologist from San Francisco." I suppressed a sigh at my mother's transparent attempt at networking, knowing she meant well, even if her efforts were misguided. Margaret Richardson had never quite understood why David and I didn't have children yet, despite our careful explanations about fertility challenges and medical interventions. In her generation, couples simply had babies when they wanted them, and complicated medical procedures weren't part of the conversation. The cardiologist turned out to be a pleasant man named Dr. Jonathan Hayes, who was genuinely interested in discussing the intersection of cardiac health and reproductive medicine. We spent several minutes talking about the cardiovascular effects of fertility medications, a topic that allowed me to showcase my professional expertise while avoiding more personal questions about my own treatment journey. "It's refreshing to meet someone who understands the complexity of these interactions," Dr. Hayes said as our conversation wound down. "Most people don't realize how interconnected different body systems are, especially when it comes to hormone regulation. Emma's one of the best reproductive endocrinologists on the West Coast," my father interjected with obvious pride. "She's helped hundreds of couples start their families over the years." The irony of his statement wasn't lost on me, but I smiled graciously and accepted the compliment. It was true that my success rate with patients was among the highest in the region, a fact that made my personal struggles even more frustrating. I understood fertility medicine better than almost anyone, could predict treatment outcomes with remarkable accuracy, and had developed innovative protocols that had been adopted by other clinics nationwide. Yet none of this expertise had been able to solve my own reproductive challenges. Ryan appeared at my elbow just as Dr. Hayes excused himself to find the restroom, carrying a glass of champagne and wearing the expression I'd learned to dread at family gatherings. He'd clearly been drinking for a while, his cheeks flushed and his smile slightly too wide for the context. "Having a good time, Emma?" he asked, settling beside me with the casual intimacy of someone who'd known me for years. "I saw you talking shop with the heart doctor. Always working, aren't you?" "Just making conversation," I replied carefully, recognizing the setup for one of his verbal ambushes. "Dr. Hayes seems very knowledgeable about his field." "Of course he is. Successful men usually are." Ryan took a long sip of his champagne, his eyes never leaving my face. "Speaking of success, Jessica told me you've been nominated for some kind of medical award. Something about innovation in fertility treatment?" I felt a flush of pride, despite my wariness about where this conversation was heading. The American Society for Reproductive Medicine had indeed nominated me for their Excellence in Patient Care Award, recognition that represented the pinnacle of achievement in my field. The nomination was based on my development of a new protocol for treating unexplained infertility that had resulted in significantly higher pregnancy rates for previously unsuccessful patients. "It's just a nomination," I said modestly. "The award ceremony isn't until next month." "Just a nomination," Ryan repeated with mock amazement. "Listen to her downplay her achievements, folks. Our Emma is too humble to admit she's apparently brilliant at helping other people get pregnant." His voice carried across the immediate area, drawing attention from nearby guests who turned to listen to our conversation. I felt my stomach drop as I recognized the trap he'd carefully constructed. By praising my professional success, Ryan had set up the perfect contrast to my personal failures, and everyone within earshot was now waiting to see where he was going with this line of commentary. "Ryan," I said quietly, hoping to deflect whatever was coming next. "Maybe we should—" No, I'm serious," he interrupted, his voice growing louder and more animated. "Emma here has helped hundreds of women get pregnant over the years. Hundreds! She's like a fertility goddess or something." He gestured broadly with his champagne glass, sloshing liquid dangerously close to the rim. "It's just so ironic that someone who's such an expert at fixing other people's baby problems can't seem to figure out her own situation." The conversations around us gradually died as more people tuned in to Ryan's monologue. I could see David across the room, his attention caught by the change in atmosphere, beginning to move in our direction with a concerned expression. Jessica was nowhere to be seen, probably tending to the baby in one of the private rooms the club had provided for nursing mothers. "That's enough, Ryan," my father said firmly, stepping closer with the protective instinct that had guided him through decades of parenting. "This isn't the time or place for that kind of discussion." But Ryan was too far into his performance to be deterred by social pressure or family disapproval. He'd found his audience and his target, and the combination of alcohol and his natural cruelty had removed whatever filter might have normally restrained him. "Come on, Tom, we're all family here," Ryan said with false joviality. "We can talk honestly about these things. It's not like it's a secret that Emma and David have been trying to have kids for years without any luck. Hell, they've probably spent more on fertility treatments than most people spend on a house." The accuracy of his estimate hit me like a physical blow. David and I had indeed spent enormous amounts of money on treatments over the years. Money we could have used for vacations or home improvements, or any number of other things that normal couples enjoyed. Instead, our savings had gone toward medications, procedures, and specialist consultations that had yielded nothing but disappointment and emotional exhaustion. "The point is," Ryan continued, warming to his theme as he noticed the shocked faces around him, "maybe if Emma spent less time playing doctor and more time actually trying to be a woman, she'd have given us a niece or nephew by now, instead of just being the family disappointment." The champagne flute slipped from my fingers before his words had fully registered, crystal shards scattering across the marble floor as the sound echoed through the sudden silence. Every person within 30 feet had stopped their conversations to stare at our small drama, their expressions ranging from shock to pity to uncomfortable embarrassment. Ryan's cruel laughter filled the void where civilized conversation had been moments before, the sound sharp and ugly against the elegant backdrop of the country club. "Ryan!" my mother gasped, her hand flying to her chest as if she'd been physically struck. "How dare you speak to Emma that way?" But the damage was done. the words hanging in the air like poison gas that couldn't be recalled or neutralized. I stood frozen in my navy dress, feeling the weight of 40 pairs of eyes examining me with the clinical interest usually reserved for medical specimens. The family disappointment. The words echoed in my head with devastating clarity, confirming every fear I'd harbored about how others perceived my struggles with infertility. David reached my side, just as the first tears began to blur my vision, his arm sliding around my waist with protective firmness. "We're leaving," he announced to no one in particular, his voice carrying a quiet fury I'd rarely heard before. "Now." "Emma, wait," my mother called as David began guiding me toward the exit. "Don't let him ruin this day. He's drunk and being stupid, but that doesn't mean—" "It's fine, Mom," I managed to say, though my voice sounded strange and distant to my own ears. "I just need some air." As we walked toward the ballroom exit, I caught a glimpse of Jessica emerging from the private nursing room with baby Lily in her arms, her face a mask of horror as she surveyed the scene. Our eyes met across the crowded room, and I saw my sister's mouth open to call my name, but I couldn't face her apologies or explanations or whatever inadequate response she might offer to her husband's cruelty. The late afternoon sun was beginning to set as David and I sat in our car in the country club parking lot, neither of us ready to drive home but unable to return to the reception. I'd stopped crying after the first few minutes, anger beginning to replace the initial shock and humiliation. Ryan had always been cruel, but this felt different, more calculated and vicious than his usual subtle jabs. "I should have hit him," David said quietly, his hands gripping the steering wheel with white-knuckled intensity. "Right there in front of everyone, I should have knocked him on his ass." "That would have made everything worse," I replied, though part of me wished he had done exactly that. Jessica would never forgive us, and it would have just given Ryan more ammunition for future attacks. "I don't care about Ryan's ammunition," David said fiercely, "and I'm starting not to care about Jessica's feelings either. She stood by and watched him treat you like garbage for years without saying a word. At some point, silence becomes complicity." I'd had similar thoughts over the years but had always pushed them aside out of loyalty to my sister. Jessica and I had been close growing up, sharing secrets and supporting each other through the typical challenges of adolescence and young adulthood. But her marriage to Ryan had created a distance between us that seemed to widen with each passing year, as if choosing him had required her to choose against me in some fundamental way. "There's something else," I said suddenly, the thought crystallizing as I spoke. "Something about baby Lily that's been bothering me all day." David turned to look at me with puzzled concern. "What do you mean?" "Her features, her coloring, everything about her appearance. She doesn't look like either Jessica or Ryan." I kept trying to figure out who she reminds me of, and I finally realized she looks exactly like Marcus Chen. The name hung between us like a confession, loaded with implications neither of us wanted to examine too closely. Marcus Chen was a reproductive endocrinologist who worked at my clinic, a brilliant researcher who had collaborated with me on several innovative treatment protocols over the past 2 years. He was also one of the most attractive men I'd ever met, with the kind of classical features and quiet intelligence that made him popular with both patients and colleagues. "Emma," David said carefully, "that's a pretty serious accusation to make based on physical resemblance. Babies can look like anyone in their first few months." "I know how genetics work, David. I've been studying inherited traits for 8 years, and I'm telling you that baby Lily has features that don't match either parent. She has Marcus's bone structure, his eye shape, even that little dimple in her chin that he tries to hide when he smiles." David was quiet for several minutes, processing the implications of what I was suggesting. If baby Lily wasn't Ryan's biological daughter, it would explain my sister's recent behavior, the way she'd been avoiding certain topics, and seemed nervous whenever Marcus's name came up in conversation. It would also provide context for Ryan's increasingly aggressive attacks on my fertility, as if he were overcompensating for some inadequacy of his own. "Even if you're right," David said finally, "what are you planning to do with this information? Destroy your sister's marriage out of revenge for what Ryan said today?" The question cut to the heart of my moral dilemma. Part of me wanted nothing more than to expose Ryan's hypocrisy and watch his perfect life crumble the same way his words had shattered my composure. But Jessica was still my sister, and baby Lily was an innocent child who deserved protection from the consequences of adult mistakes. "I don't know," I admitted. But I can't unknow what I suspect, and I can't pretend that Ryan's behavior tonight was acceptable just because he's family. My phone buzzed with a text message from Jessica. "Emma, I'm so sorry about Ryan. He was completely out of line and I told him so. Can we talk tomorrow? I need to explain some things." The message confirmed my suspicions more effectively than any DNA test could have. Jessica's need to explain some things suggested secrets that went far beyond her husband's drinking problem or his tendency toward cruelty. My sister was reaching out because she knew that Ryan's attack tonight had crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed, and she was afraid of what I might do with the knowledge I possessed. "She wants to talk tomorrow," I told David, showing him the message. "Apparently she needs to explain some things." David read the text with growing understanding. "So you're not the only one keeping secrets in this family?" "It would seem not," I agreed, feeling a strange mixture of vindication and sadness. For years, I'd felt like the family member was something to hide, the one who couldn't measure up to everyone else's expectations or achievements. But if my suspicions about baby Lily's parentage were correct, then Jessica had been hiding something far more significant than fertility treatments or professional struggles. As we finally drove home through the quiet streets of Riverside, I found myself thinking about the secret I'd been keeping from my own family, the professional recognition and personal strength that I'd hidden behind a facade of vulnerability and failure. Ryan's cruelty tonight had been designed to reinforce his perception of me as the family disappointment, but what he didn't know was that I held information that could destroy everything he thought he knew about his perfect life. The irony was almost too perfect to believe. Ryan had humiliated me in front of 40 guests by highlighting my inability to conceive a child, all while celebrating a daughter who might not even be his own. The man who had just called me the family disappointment was potentially raising another man's baby, and the woman he'd accused of not knowing how to be a real woman might be the only person who could prove his wife's infidelity. Tomorrow I would talk to Jessica and learn the truth about baby Lily's parentage. Tomorrow I would decide whether to use that information to protect my sister or to exact revenge on her husband. Tonight I would sit with the knowledge that family secrets run deeper than anyone imagines, and that sometimes the people who appear most vulnerable possess the power to change everything. The morning after the christening arrived with the kind of persistent drizzle that matched my emotional state perfectly. I'd spent most of the night staring at the ceiling while David slept fitfully beside me, both of us processing the events at the country club in our own ways. By 6 a.m. I'd given up on sleep entirely and made my way to the kitchen, where I sat with my coffee and tried to prepare for whatever conversation Jessica had planned for us. My phone had been buzzing intermittently since dawn with messages from various family members who'd witnessed Ryan's outburst. Most were variations of the same theme, expressing shock at his behavior and concern for my well-being, but none addressed the elephant in the room that his cruelty might have exposed deeper family secrets. My mother had sent 3 separate texts, each one more worried than the last, asking if I was okay and whether she should have a talk with that boy about proper behavior. The irony of my mother referring to Ryan as that boy wasn't lost on me, given that he was 35 years old and supposedly a successful businessman who should have learned basic social skills decades ago. But Margaret Richardson had never fully approved of her elder daughter's choice in husbands, though she'd been too polite to voice her concerns directly until now. Ryan's performance at the christening had apparently pushed her beyond the limits of diplomatic silence. Jessica's message from the night before remained unanswered on my phone, her request to talk today sitting there like an unexploded bomb. I knew that once we had that conversation, there would be no going back to the comfortable fiction we'd all been maintaining about our perfect family dynamics. Whatever secrets my sister needed to explain would fundamentally change our relationship. Just as my own hidden professional life had created distance between my public and private selves. David appeared in the kitchen around 7:30, already dressed for his morning jog despite the weather. Running had become his primary stress management technique over the years, a way to process the emotional toll of our fertility struggles, without having to articulate feelings that defied easy expression. I'd often envied his ability to literally run away from problems, even temporarily, since my own coping mechanisms tended to involve working longer hours at the clinic. "Any word from Jessica yet?" he asked, stretching against the kitchen counter in preparation for his run. "Just the message from last night asking to talk today. I haven't responded yet because I'm not sure I'm ready for whatever she needs to tell me." David nodded, understanding, having learned over our years together that I needed time to process emotional situations before I could engage with them productively. "Do you want me to be there when you talk to her? Moral support or backup or whatever you need?" The offer was tempting, but I knew this conversation needed to happen between sisters without the complication of spouses trying to protect their partner's interests. "Thanks, but I think this needs to be just Jessica and me. Whatever she's hiding, she'll be more likely to tell the truth if she doesn't have to worry about how it affects you and Ryan's relationship." "What relationship?" David asked with bitter humor. "After last night, I'm pretty sure Ryan and I are done pretending to be cordial family members. I meant what I said about wanting to hit him, Emma. The man is a sociopathic bully who gets pleasure from hurting people, especially you." I'd come to similar conclusions about Ryan's character over the years, but hearing David articulate it so bluntly still felt jarring. We'd both been raised to believe in the importance of family loyalty and maintaining peaceful relationships even when individual family members were difficult to tolerate. But Ryan's behavior had moved beyond difficult into genuinely destructive territory, and continuing to enable it felt like a form of self-harm. "If I'm right about baby Lily," I said carefully, "then Ryan might not be the only one who's been hiding their true nature. Jessica has been lying too, and for much longer than just last night." David considered this as he finished his stretching routine. "Are you prepared for the possibility that you're wrong? That your suspicions about the baby are just your mind trying to make sense of Ryan's cruelty by finding some way to discredit him?" The question forced me to examine my motivations more honestly than I'd been willing to do since leaving the country club. Was I projecting my own desires for revenge onto an innocent situation? Had my professional expertise in genetics led me to see patterns that didn't actually exist? The possibility that I was wrong about baby Lily's parentage was genuinely terrifying, because it would mean I'd let Ryan's attack push me into paranoid speculation about my own sister. "I've been thinking about that all night," I admitted. "And yes, it's possible that I'm wrong, but it's also possible that I'm right, and that changes everything about how we handle Ryan's behavior going forward. Just promise me you'll be careful about how you approach this with Jessica. If she is hiding something, confronting her directly might make her defensive in ways that hurt both of you." I agreed to proceed cautiously, though part of me wanted nothing more than to demand immediate answers and complete honesty from everyone involved. The careful diplomacy required for family relationships had always been exhausting to me, especially when compared to the straightforward problem-solving approach I used in my professional life. Patients came to me with clear medical issues that could be diagnosed and treated through established protocols, but family dynamics operated according to much murkier rules. After David left for his run, I finally responded to Jessica's message with a simple suggestion that she come over around 10 o'clock. My sister replied immediately with gratitude and relief, confirming that she'd been awake early, waiting for my response. The speed of her reply suggested a level of anxiety that supported my growing suspicions about whatever secrets she needed to share. I used the remaining time before Jessica's arrival to review what I actually knew versus what I suspected about baby Lily's parentage. The facts were limited but troubling when considered together. Jessica had been unusually secretive about her pregnancy timeline, giving vague answers when I asked about conception dates or due date calculations. She'd also switched to a different obstetrician halfway through her pregnancy, claiming insurance issues, though I knew their coverage was excellent. More significantly, Jessica had been working closely with Marcus Chen on a hospital fundraising committee during the time period when baby Lily would have been conceived. The committee met twice monthly and often worked late into the evening on event planning and donor cultivation. Jessica had mentioned these meetings frequently during the early months of her pregnancy, always with a level of enthusiasm that seemed disproportionate to the actual work involved. Marcus himself had been behaving strangely around me for the past several months, avoiding the casual conversations we'd previously enjoyed and seeming uncomfortable whenever Jessica's name came up in professional contexts. I'd attributed his distance to the general awkwardness that often surrounded my fertility struggles, assuming he felt guilty about his own reproductive success while I continued to face challenges. But if he was actually involved with my sister, his discomfort would have an entirely different explanation. The physical resemblance between Marcus and baby Lily remained the most compelling evidence supporting my suspicions. While David was right that babies could resemble anyone in their early months, the specific combination of features I'd observed went beyond general similarity into genuinely striking resemblance. Baby Lily had Marcus's distinctive eye shape, his delicate bone structure, and even the subtle asymmetry in his smile that made him so attractive to patients and colleagues alike. Jessica arrived precisely at 10 o'clock, looking exhausted and anxious in a way that immediately confirmed the seriousness of whatever she needed to discuss. She'd clearly been crying recently, her eyes red-rimmed despite careful makeup application, and she carried herself with the defeated posture of someone preparing for an unpleasant but necessary conversation. "Thank you for agreeing to see me," she said as I led her into our living room. "I wasn't sure you'd want to after what Ryan did last night." "Ryan's behavior was inexcusable," I replied, settling into the chair across from our couch where Jessica had positioned herself. "But you're my sister, and whatever problems we need to work through, we should be able to do that honestly." Jessica nodded, though her expression suggested she wasn't entirely confident about the honesty part of my statement. "I need to start by apologizing for Ryan's cruelty last night. There's no excuse for what he said or how he said it, and I should have stopped him before he went that far." "Why didn't you?" I asked, directly. "You've been watching him make these kinds of comments for years without intervening. Last night was just the most public example of behavior you've been enabling through your silence." The accusation hit Jessica visibly, her composure cracking as she struggled to find an adequate response. "It's complicated, Emma. Ryan has been under a lot of stress lately with work and the baby, and I kept thinking that if I could just manage the situations better, I could prevent these outbursts." "That's not an explanation, Jess. That's an excuse. There's a difference between someone being stressed and someone being deliberately cruel. Ryan enjoys hurting people, especially me, and you've been pretending not to notice because it's easier than confronting him." Jessica was crying now, tears streaming down her face as she finally faced the reality of her husband's character that she'd been avoiding for years. "You're right. I've been a coward about standing up to him because I was afraid of what it might cost me. But there are things you don't know about our marriage, complications that made me feel like I couldn't afford to create more conflict." "What kind of complications?" I asked, though I suspected I already knew the answer. Jessica took a shuddering breath and looked directly at me for the first time since arriving. "Lily isn't Ryan's daughter." The confession hung between us like a physical presence, confirming my suspicions while simultaneously creating a whole new level of complexity to our family situation. I'd been prepared for this revelation intellectually, but hearing it spoken aloud still felt like a punch to the stomach. "How long have you known?" I asked when I could trust my voice to remain steady. "Since before she was born. I had a private paternity test done during my pregnancy because I suspected, but I needed to be certain." Jessica wiped her eyes with a tissue from her purse, struggling to maintain enough composure to continue the conversation. "Ryan doesn't know, obviously. He's never questioned that he's her father." "And the real father?" Jessica's hesitation answered my question before she spoke. "Marcus Chen." The confirmation of my suspicions created a strange mixture of vindication and devastation. I'd been right about the physical resemblance and the timing, but being correct about my sister's infidelity didn't feel like the victory I'd anticipated. Instead, it felt like watching my family disintegrate in real time. "How did it happen?" I asked, needing to understand the sequence of events that had led to this moment. Jessica's story emerged in fits and starts, interrupted by tears and long pauses as she struggled to articulate decisions that had seemed reasonable at the time but looked increasingly destructive in retrospect. The affair with Marcus had begun during their work on the hospital fundraising committee, initially as an emotional connection that grew out of their shared frustration with their respective relationships. Marcus had been going through a difficult divorce from his wife of 12 years, a process that had left him questioning everything about his personal life and future plans. Jessica had been dealing with Ryan's increasing emotional distance and cruelty, feeling isolated and undervalued in a marriage that had become more about maintaining appearances than genuine partnership. "It wasn't supposed to happen," Jessica insisted, as if good intentions could somehow mitigate the consequences of her choices. "We were just friends initially, supporting each other through difficult times. But Marcus understood me in ways that Ryan never had, and he made me feel valued and appreciated for who I actually was, rather than who I was supposed to be. The affair had continued for approximately 6 months, during which time Jessica had been using birth control and assumed she was protected from pregnancy. When she discovered she was expecting, the timing made it clear that Marcus was the biological father rather than Ryan, who had been traveling extensively for work during the conception window. I considered telling Ryan the truth initially, Jessica continued, her voice barely above a whisper. But Marcus was still going through his divorce, and I was terrified of what Ryan might do if he found out. You've seen how cruel he can be when he's angry. I couldn't risk him taking revenge on both Marcus and me. So you decided to let Ryan believe he was the father and raise another man's child as his own? I decided to protect my daughter from the chaos that the truth would create, Jessica corrected with sudden fierceness. Lily deserves a stable home with parents who can provide for her, not a broken family destroyed by adult mistakes. The justification revealed how thoroughly Jessica had convinced herself that deception was the most loving choice available to her. In her mind, she wasn't betraying Ryan or Marcus or even baby Lily, but rather protecting all of them from consequences that would ultimately hurt everyone involved. What about Marcus? I asked. Does he know he has a daughter? Jessica's silence stretched long enough to provide its own answer. Marcus knew about baby Lily's parentage and had chosen to remain silent about his biological connection to her, allowing Ryan to unknowingly raise his child while he maintained his distance from the situation. He knows, Jessica finally confirmed. We discussed it when I found out I was pregnant, and we agreed that the most responsible thing would be to let Ryan be her father in every way that matters. Marcus didn't want to destroy 2 marriages and potentially ruin his career over what we both acknowledged was a mistake. The clinical way Jessica discussed Marcus's involvement in the decision-making process revealed how thoroughly both of them had rationalized their choices. They'd approached the situation like a business problem to be solved rather than a moral crisis with lasting implications for everyone involved, including the innocent child at the center of their deception. And you've been comfortable living with this lie for 6 months? I asked, struggling to understand how my sister could maintain such an elaborate deception while seemingly functioning normally in her daily life. Comfortable isn't the word I'd use, Jessica replied with bitter humor. Terrified would be more accurate. Every day I worry that someone will notice the resemblance, or that Ryan will demand a paternity test for some reason, or that Marcus will change his mind about keeping the secret. The revelation explains so much about Jessica's behavior over the past year that I'd previously attributed to normal new mother anxiety. Her reluctance to discuss baby Lily's features or development milestones, her nervousness around family gatherings where Marcus might be present, her increasing distance from Ryan despite their outward appearance of marital happiness. Why are you telling me this now? I asked. What changed? Jessica's expression shifted from guilt to something approaching desperation. Ryan's been talking about having another baby. He wants Lily to have siblings close in age, and he's been pressuring me to stop using birth control so we can start trying immediately. The implications of this information created a new level of complexity to the situation. If Jessica conceived another child with Ryan, the physical differences between her children might make baby Lily's true parentage more obvious. More importantly, Jessica would be forced to continue her deceptive relationship with Ryan, while knowing that any future children would actually be his biological offspring. I can't do it, Emma, Jessica continued, her voice breaking with emotion. I can't have more children with Ryan knowing what I know about Lily's parentage. It feels like I'd be compounding the original lie with additional deception, and I'm not strong enough to maintain that level of dishonesty long term. So what are you planning to do? I don't know. That's why I needed to talk to you. I need advice from someone I trust. Someone who understands the medical complexities involved. Someone who might be able to help me figure out how to move forward without destroying everyone's lives. The weight of Jessica's trust and desperation settled on my shoulders like a physical burden. My sister was asking me to help her navigate a situation that had no good solutions, where every possible path forward would cause pain to innocent people, while potentially exposing all of us to Ryan's retaliation. Have you considered the possibility that Ryan already suspects? I asked. His behavior toward me last night was particularly vicious, even for him. Sometimes when people are insecure about their own situations, They attack others more aggressively to deflect attention from their own vulnerabilities. Jessica looked genuinely surprised by the suggestion. You think he knows about Marcus? I think he might suspect something, even if he hasn't admitted it to himself consciously. The timing of his attack on my fertility struggles. The specific cruelty of calling me the family disappointment. The way he's been pushing for another baby immediately. It all suggests someone who's overcompensating for feeling threatened. The possibility that Ryan might already be aware of baby Lily's true parentage added another layer of complexity to the situation. If he suspected but hadn't confronted Jessica directly, it could mean he was gathering evidence or planning his own form of retaliation. Alternatively, it might indicate that he was in denial about obvious signs, because acknowledging the truth would force him to confront the failure of his marriage. What would you do if you were in my position? Jessica asked desperately. If you had to choose between maintaining a lie that protects everyone or telling the truth that destroys multiple families. The question forced me to examine my own relationship with deception and truth-telling in ways that felt uncomfortably personal. I'd been maintaining my own elaborate fiction about my professional success for years, allowing my family to believe I was struggling when I was actually thriving in my career. The parallel between my situation and Jessica's was impossible to ignore, even though the stakes and consequences were entirely different. I think, I said carefully, that the truth has a way of coming out eventually, regardless of what we plan or prefer. The question isn't whether Ryan will find out about Lily's parentage, but when and how he'll discover it. Your choice is whether to control that revelation or let circumstances force it into the open. Jessica nodded slowly, processing the implications of my perspective. And Marcus? What about his career and his life? If this comes out publicly, it could ruin his professional reputation and any chance he has of rebuilding after his divorce. The mention of Marcus's well-being created an unexpected surge of anger in my chest. While Jessica worried about protecting the man who had helped create this situation through his own choices, no one seemed particularly concerned about the impact on me or David, or even baby Lily herself. Marcus was a grown man who had made decisions with full knowledge of the potential consequences, yet he was being treated like another victim rather than an active participant in the deception. Marcus is a reproductive endocrinologist who had an affair with a married woman and then chose to let another man unknowingly raise his biological child, I said with more edge than I'd intended. His career concerns are significantly less important than the welfare of the child involved, or the emotional well-being of the people who've been deceived. Jessica flinched at my harsh assessment of Marcus's role in the situation. I know how it sounds, Emma, but the situation is more complicated than that summary suggests. Marcus never wanted to hurt anyone, and he's been supportive throughout this entire process even while maintaining appropriate distance. Appropriate distance, I repeated with disbelief. Jessica, he fathered a child and then walked away so completely that his own daughter doesn't know he exists. That's not appropriate distance, that's abandonment with extra steps. The conversation was becoming more heated than either of us had intended, but the stress of the revelations was bringing underlying tensions to the surface. Jessica had clearly been hoping for understanding and support from me, while I was struggling to process the implications of her choices for our entire family dynamic. I need some time to think about all of this, I said finally, recognizing that we were both too emotional to have a productive discussion about next steps. This affects everyone in our family, including David and me, and I can't make recommendations about how you should handle it without considering all the consequences. Jessica nodded reluctantly, gathering her purse and preparing to leave despite the obvious reluctance to end our conversation without clear resolution. Will you keep this confidential while you're thinking about it? I know it's a lot to ask, but I need to know that Ryan won't find out accidentally before I decide how to handle telling him myself. I won't say anything to Ryan directly, I promised, but I can't guarantee that this won't affect how David and I interact with him going forward. After last night, we're already planning to limit our contact with him regardless of what I know about Lily's parentage. That's fair, Jessica agreed. And Emma? Thank you for listening without judging me too harshly. I know I've made terrible choices, but I've been trying to do what seemed best for everyone involved. After Jessica left, I sat in my living room processing the magnitude of what she'd shared with me. The secret she'd been carrying for months explained so much about the recent family dynamics, but it also created new moral dilemmas that I wasn't sure how to resolve. As a medical professional, I understood the genetic and legal implications of paternity deception. As a sister, I wanted to protect Jessica from the consequences of her mistakes. As someone who'd been attacked by Ryan the previous night, I felt a certain satisfaction in knowing that his perfect life was built on foundations that were far more fragile than he realized. The sound of David returning from his extended run interrupted my contemplation. He entered the house sweaty and slightly breathless, but his expression brightened when he saw me sitting calmly in the living room, rather than pacing anxiously as I often did after difficult conversations. "How did it go with Jessica?" he asked, settling into the chair beside mine without bothering to change out of his running clothes. "She confirmed what I suspected about baby Lily's parentage," I said simply. "Marcus Chen is the biological father, and Ryan has no idea." David's eyebrows rose as he absorbed this information. "Wow, that's actually worse than I was expecting, and I was already prepared for it to be pretty bad." "It gets worse. Jessica's been carrying this secret for months. Marcus knows about his biological connection to the baby, but has chosen to remain uninvolved. And Ryan is pushing for Jessica to have another child immediately." "Jesus," David muttered, running his hands through his hair as he processed the implications. "So what's Jessica planning to do about it?" "She doesn't know. That's why she came to me for advice, though I'm not sure what kind of guidance I can offer in a situation this complicated." David was quiet for several minutes, his analytical mind working through the various scenarios and consequences that Jessica's revelation had created. "You know what bothers me most about this?" he finally said. "It's not that Jessica made a mistake or even that she's been lying about it. It's that Marcus has been walking around the hospital acting like nothing happened while knowing that he has a biological daughter he's completely abandoned." The observation highlighted an aspect of the situation that I'd been trying not to think about too directly. Marcus and I worked together regularly, collaborated on research projects, and maintained what I'd thought was a professional friendship based on mutual respect and shared expertise. Knowing that he'd been hiding such a significant secret while watching me struggle with my own fertility challenges felt like a particularly cruel form of betrayal. "I keep thinking about all the times he's been sympathetic about our treatment failures," I said, voicing thoughts I'd been pushing aside since Jessica's confession. "All the conversations we've had about the emotional toll of infertility, all the professional consultations where he's offered advice about next steps. The entire time, he's known that he fathered a child through an affair while I've been desperately trying to conceive with my own husband." "That's really messed up," David agreed. "Even if he felt like he couldn't tell you about the affair directly, continuing to engage with you about fertility issues while hiding his own reproductive success feels genuinely sadistic." The characterization of Marcus's behavior as sadistic felt harsh, but not entirely inaccurate. Whether intentionally or not, he'd been participating in conversations about my fertility struggles, while knowing information that would have fundamentally changed my perspective on both his character and my sister's marriage. The deception felt particularly cruel given my professional relationship with him and the trust I'd placed in his medical expertise. "So what do we do now?" David asked. "Do we pretend we don't know anything and continue interacting with Marcus and Ryan like nothing has changed? Do we confront them directly? Do we wait for Jessica to figure out her next move?" The questions captured the essential dilemma created by Jessica's confession. Knowing the truth about baby Lily's parentage gave us power over the situation, but using that power in any direction would likely cause significant damage to multiple relationships and potentially harm an innocent child. "I think," I said slowly, "that we need to consider what outcome would be best for baby Lily, and then work backward from there to figure out how to achieve it." "What do you think would be best for her?" "Honestly, I think she deserves to know who her biological father is, and she deserves to have that father take responsibility for his role in her existence. But I also think she deserves stability and security, which might be threatened if the truth comes out in a destructive way." David nodded thoughtfully. "So we're looking for a solution that provides honesty and accountability while minimizing collateral damage to everyone involved." "Exactly. Which means we need to find a way to encourage Jessica to tell the truth voluntarily, rather than forcing the revelation through confrontation or ultimatum. And if she won't do it voluntarily? The question hung between us like a challenge, forcing me to examine how far I was willing to go to ensure that the truth eventually came to light. Part of me wanted to march directly to Ryan and reveal everything I knew, partly out of concern for baby Lily's welfare, and partly out of desire for revenge against his cruelty. But I also recognized that such an approach would likely cause maximum damage, while providing minimal benefit to the people who deserved protection. Then we'll cross that bridge when we come to it, I said finally. For now, I want to give Jessica the opportunity to do the right thing on her own timeline. How long are you willing to wait? I don't know. But I do know that after last night, I'm done pretending that Ryan's behavior is acceptable just because he's family. Whether or not Jessica tells him the truth about Lily, I'm going to make sure he understands that attacking me publicly has consequences. David smiled grimly at my declaration. What kind of consequences are you thinking about? I'm not sure yet, but Ryan seems to think that he can humiliate me without any repercussions because he sees me as powerless and unsuccessful. Maybe it's time he learned that his assumptions about my life are just as wrong as his assumptions about his own. 3 weeks passed after Jessica's confession, and the weight of her secret had become a constant presence in my daily life. Every morning when I arrived at Riverside General Hospital, I found myself scanning the corridors for Marcus Chen, wondering how someone could maintain such complete composure while carrying the knowledge that he'd abandoned his own biological daughter. Our professional interactions had become increasingly strained as I struggled to separate my personal feelings from our collaborative work on the new fertility treatment protocols. The irony of working alongside the man who had fathered a child through an affair while I continued to face my own fertility challenges wasn't lost on me. Each time we discussed patient cases or reviewed research data, I found myself studying his face for signs of guilt or discomfort that might reveal his awareness of the awkward dynamic between us. But Marcus maintained his usual professional demeanor, showing no indication that our collaboration had become personally complicated for either of us. My relationship with Jessica had become equally complex since her revelation. She called or texted daily, ostensibly to check on my well-being after Ryan's public humiliation, but actually seeking reassurance that I hadn't changed my mind about keeping her secret. Our conversations had taken on a careful quality, both of us dancing around the enormous truth that now dominated our sisterly relationship, while trying to maintain some semblance of normal family interaction. Ryan himself had made no attempt to apologize for his behavior at the christening reception, apparently convinced that his attack on my fertility struggles had been justified by whatever internal logic governed his worldview. When we encountered each other at family gatherings, he maintained his usual facade of superficial charm, while his eyes held the satisfaction of someone who believed he'd successfully established dominance over a perceived rival. The dynamic had reached a breaking point the previous Friday when Ryan cornered me in the parking lot after a family dinner at our parents' house. He'd clearly been drinking again, his face flushed and his stance slightly unsteady as he approached my car with what he probably thought was casual confidence. "Emma," he'd said, leaning against my driver's side door to prevent me from leaving immediately. "I wanted to clear the air about what happened at Lily's christening. I think maybe you misunderstood what I was trying to say. The suggestion that I had somehow misinterpreted his public mockery of my infertility was so absurd that I'd actually laughed out loud. I understood you perfectly, Ryan. You wanted to humiliate me in front of our entire family, and you succeeded. There's nothing unclear about what happened." "Come on, don't be so sensitive," he'd replied with the condescending tone he reserved for moments when he wanted to maximize his psychological impact. "I was just pointing out some obvious facts about your situation. If you can't handle honest observations about your life choices, maybe you should reconsider those choices." The conversation had continued for several more minutes, with Ryan escalating his verbal attacks while I struggled to maintain my composure, despite the growing urge to reveal everything I knew about his own situation. The knowledge that his perfect life was built on foundations far more fragile than mine had become a source of both comfort and frustration, offering me potential power that I couldn't yet figure out how to use constructively. That encounter had crystallized my growing conviction that remaining passive in the face of Ryan's cruelty was no longer an acceptable option. Whether or not Jessica chose to reveal the truth about baby Lily's parentage, I needed to find a way to protect myself from future attacks while potentially creating space for the truth to emerge naturally. The opportunity came unexpectedly during a routine Monday morning staff meeting at the hospital. Dr. Patricia Miller, our department head, was reviewing the nominations for the American Society for Reproductive Medicine's annual awards when she announced that my innovation in treating unexplained infertility had been selected for the Excellence in Patient Care Award. The recognition represented the pinnacle of achievement in my field, an honor that would likely lead to speaking engagements, research collaborations, and significantly enhanced professional reputation. Dr. Richardson will be presenting her findings at the National Conference in Chicago next month, Dr. Miller continued, and the award ceremony will be covered by several medical journals as well as mainstream media outlets interested in fertility treatment advances. The news created a surge of professional pride that was immediately tempered by the realization that accepting this level of public recognition would make it impossible to continue hiding my success from my family. The award ceremony would generate exactly the kind of media coverage that would inevitably reach people in Riverside, particularly given the local interest in medical innovations coming from our regional hospital. After the meeting concluded, I found myself walking slowly back to my office while processing the implications of this unexpected development. For years, I'd carefully managed my professional achievements to avoid the kind of publicity that might alert my family to my actual level of success in reproductive medicine. But this award was too significant to decline or minimize, and attempting to do so would likely damage my career prospects while failing to solve the underlying problem of my family's misconceptions about my life. Marcus appeared beside me in the hallway, his expression congratulatory but somehow strained as he fell into step with my pace. "Congratulations on the award," he said in the carefully neutral tone he'd been using with me for months. "It's well-deserved recognition for genuinely groundbreaking work." "Thank you," I replied, studying his face for any sign that he understood the personal complications this recognition would create for me. "I'm looking forward to presenting the research to a broader audience." "Your family must be incredibly proud," Marcus continued, and I caught something in his voice that suggested he was fishing for information about what my relatives knew regarding my professional achievements. The comment created an opening for the kind of honest conversation we'd been avoiding since I'd begun suspecting his connection to baby Lily. "Actually, my family doesn't know about the nomination or any of my other professional recognition over the years. I've kept that part of my life separate from family relationships for personal reasons." Marcus's eyebrows rose slightly, the first genuine expression I'd seen from him in our recent interactions. "That must be difficult, maintaining such separate worlds. Don't you want them to know about your success?" "It's complicated," I said, unconsciously echoing Jessica's frequent explanation for her own deceptive choices. Family dynamics can be challenging when professional achievement creates unexpected power imbalances or changes people's expectations about relationships. The irony of discussing family secrets and professional complications with someone who was maintaining his own elaborate deception wasn't lost on me. Marcus nodded as if he understood the challenges of compartmentalizing personal and professional lives, though I suspected his motivations were quite different from mine. "Well," he said as we reached my office door, "I hope you'll consider sharing this achievement with people who care about you. Sometimes the people we think might react poorly to success are actually more supportive than we expect them to be." The advice felt particularly hollow coming from someone who had chosen to completely abandon his biological daughter, rather than face the complications that acknowledging her existence would create. But I simply thanked him for his thoughts and retreated into my office to begin planning how to handle the inevitable revelation of my professional identity to my family. The first step was calling David to share the news about the award and discuss strategies for managing our relatives' reactions when the publicity began. My husband's excitement about my recognition was immediate and genuine, though he quickly grasped the complications this development would create for our carefully maintained family dynamics. "This is incredible, Emma," he said after I'd explained the scope of the honor and its likely media coverage. "I know how hard you've worked for this recognition, and you deserve every bit of the acclaim that comes with it." "Thank you, but what do we do about the family situation? There's no way to keep this quiet anymore, which means everyone's going to find out about my actual career achievements whether I want them to or not." David was quiet for a moment, processing the implications. "Maybe that's not such a bad thing. After Ryan's behavior at the christening, do you really want to continue protecting him from the knowledge that he's been attacking someone who's actually more professionally successful than he is? The suggestion that I might use my professional recognition as a weapon against Ryan's cruelty was tempting, but also ethically complicated. I don't want to reveal my achievements out of spite or revenge, but I also can't hide them anymore, so I need to figure out how to manage the revelation in a way that minimizes family drama while still protecting myself from future attacks. What if you approached it as an opportunity for honesty rather than a defensive strategy? David suggested. Tell your parents and Jessica about the award directly, on your own terms, before they find out through media coverage. Frame it as wanting to share good news with people you love, rather than as a response to Ryan's behavior. The approach had merit, though I suspected that no amount of careful framing would prevent family members from questioning why I'd hidden such significant achievements for so long. But David was right, that taking control of the narrative would be preferable to having my professional identity revealed through external sources that might sensationalize the disconnect between my public and private personas. I decided to start with my parents, who would likely be the most straightforwardly proud of my achievements once they understood the scope of what I'd accomplished in reproductive medicine. Margaret and Tom Richardson had always valued education and professional success, even if they'd been puzzled by my apparent lack of career advancement over the years. The conversation took place that evening over dinner at their house, with David and me carefully steering the discussion toward my work at the hospital before revealing the award news. My parents' initial reaction was exactly what I'd hoped for: immediate pride and excitement about my recognition, followed quickly by confusion about why they were learning about my professional achievements for the first time. "I don't understand," my mother said after I'd explained the significance of the award and the research that had earned it. "You've been doing this level of work for years without mentioning it? Why would you keep something so important to yourself?" "It's complicated, Mom," I began, then caught myself using Jessica's favorite phrase and tried for a more honest explanation. I wanted our family relationships to be based on personal connections rather than professional achievements or financial success. I was worried that if you knew about my career recognition, it would change how you saw me or create expectations that might damage our relationships. My father looked genuinely puzzled by this explanation. "Emma, sweetheart, we're proud of you regardless of your professional achievements. But we're also proud of your work and your dedication to helping other families. Why would sharing good news about your career damage our relationship?" The question forced me to examine motivations that I'd never articulated clearly, even to myself. I suppose I was afraid that professional success would overshadow other aspects of my identity, or that it might create resentment from family members who felt like I was showing off or trying to prove something. "What family members?" my mother asked with the sharp insight that had made her a formidable mathematics teacher for 3 decades. "Who exactly did you think would resent your professional achievements?" Before I could formulate a diplomatic response, my father provided his own answer. "She was worried about Ryan's reaction," he said flatly. "That man has been undermining Emma's confidence for years, with his subtle digs and backhanded comments. I should have put a stop to it long ago." The accuracy of my father's assessment surprised me, since I hadn't realized that other family members had noticed the pattern of Ryan's behavior toward me. "It wasn't just Ryan," I said, though we all knew that wasn't entirely true. "I was concerned about changing family dynamics in general." "Well, the dynamics are going to change now, whether you planned for it or not," my mother observed practically. "Once this award ceremony happens and people start reading about your work, everyone in Riverside is going to know exactly how accomplished you are. The question is whether you want to control that narrative or let other people define it for you." The conversation continued for another hour, with my parents asking detailed questions about my research and expressing amazement at achievements they'd never known to celebrate. Their pride was genuine and overwhelming, making me realize how much I'd underestimated their capacity to be supportive without being possessive or demanding. The discussion also revealed how much my secrecy had inadvertently hurt them over the years. My mother had worried that my apparent lack of career advancement indicated some kind of professional struggle that I was too proud to discuss with them. My father had interpreted my reluctance to share details about my work as evidence that I didn't trust their ability to understand or appreciate my achievements. "We could have been celebrating your success all along," my mother said with obvious regret. "Instead, we've been worried about you for no reason while you were actually thriving in your career." The guilt I felt about causing unnecessary concern was balanced by relief at finally being able to share my professional identity with people who had always loved and supported me. My parents' reaction gave me hope that other family members might also respond more positively than I'd anticipated to learning about my hidden achievements. The conversation with Jessica proved more complicated, as I'd expected given the additional layer of secrets that now existed between us. When I called to share the news about the award, her initial excitement was quickly tempered by anxiety about what my increased public profile might mean for her own situation. "This is wonderful, Emma," she said after I'd explained the recognition and its implications. "You deserve all the acclaim you're going to receive. But does this mean you'll be doing interviews and media appearances? Will reporters be asking about your personal life or family background?" The questions revealed her concern that my professional recognition might somehow expose her own secrets, though the connection between my fertility research and her marriage deception seemed tenuous at best. "I'll probably do some interviews about the research itself," I said carefully, "but I don't anticipate that my personal life will be particularly relevant to reporters covering medical innovations." "Of course not," Jessica said quickly, apparently realizing how self-centered her concerns must sound. "I'm sorry for making this about me. I'm just still feeling anxious about everything we discussed recently, and I guess I'm worried about any changes that might affect our current situation." "Has anything changed with Ryan or your decision about how to handle things?" Jessica sighed heavily. "Not really. He's still pushing for us to have another baby immediately, and I'm still trying to figure out how to handle that pressure without revealing why I'm resistant to the idea. I keep hoping that if I delay long enough, he'll either lose interest in having more children or something will happen to force the truth into the open naturally." The passive approach to such a significant problem seemed increasingly problematic to me, especially given the stakes involved for baby Lily's future well-being. "Jess, waiting for something to happen naturally isn't really a strategy. At some point, you're going to have to make an active choice about whether to continue this deception or tell Ryan the truth." "I know you're right," she said, defensively. "But every option seems like it leads to disaster for everyone involved. If I tell Ryan about Marcus, he'll demand a divorce and probably try to take Lily away from me out of spite. If I don't tell him and he finds out another way, the consequences could be even worse. What about Marcus? Have you talked to him about taking more responsibility for his daughter, or at least contributing to her financial support?" The question created a long silence on Jessica's end of the call. Marcus and I agreed that it would be better for everyone if he maintained distance from the situation. Getting him more involved would just complicate things further and increase the risk of Ryan discovering the truth. The explanation highlighted how thoroughly both Jessica and Marcus had prioritized their own comfort over baby Lily's best interests, or Ryan's right to know the truth about his family situation. Their agreement to keep Marcus uninvolved was really a mutual decision to avoid the consequences of their choices, by forcing Ryan to unknowingly bear the responsibility for raising another man's child. "That's not sustainable long-term," I said, allowing some of my frustration to color my voice. "Lily deserves to know who her biological father is, and she deserves to have that father acknowledge his responsibility to her. What you and Marcus have arranged might be convenient for both of you, but it's not fair to her or to Ryan." "You think I should just destroy everyone's lives by telling the truth?" Jessica asked, her tone becoming defensive. "I think you should stop pretending that maintaining this lie is somehow protecting people. You're protecting yourself and Marcus from consequences, but you're not protecting Lily or Ryan or even our family from the long-term damage that this deception will cause." The conversation ended without resolution, but I could hear in Jessica's voice that my arguments were beginning to penetrate her rationalization about the morality of her choices. The pressure of maintaining such an elaborate deception was clearly taking its toll on her emotional well-being, and the additional stress of Ryan's demands for another child was pushing her toward some kind of breaking point. 2 days later, I encountered Marcus in the hospital cafeteria during my lunch break. He was sitting alone at a corner table, staring at his phone with an expression of intense concentration that suggested he was dealing with some kind of personal crisis. When he noticed me approaching with my tray, he quickly put the phone away and attempted to resume his usual professional demeanor. "Mind if I join you?" I asked, settling into the chair across from him before he could politely decline. I wanted to follow up on our conversation about sharing professional achievements with family members. Marcus looked uncomfortable but nodded agreement. "Of course. How are you handling the award publicity with your relatives? I've started telling them about my actual career accomplishments, I said, watching his reaction carefully. It's been an interesting experience, revealing parts of my life that I've kept hidden for years. There's something liberating about finally being honest about professional success, even when that honesty creates complications. The pointed nature of my comments wasn't lost on Marcus, who shifted uncomfortably in his chair. That must be a relief, not having to maintain separate versions of yourself for different audiences. It is, I agreed. Though I've realized that keeping significant secrets from people you care about creates distance and mistrust that can be really damaging to relationships. I'm starting to think that honesty, even when it's difficult or inconvenient, is usually the better choice in the long run. Marcus was studying my face with the intensity of someone trying to decode a message that might have personal implications for him. That's an admirable perspective, though I imagine some situations are more complicated than others. Sometimes people have reasons for maintaining privacy that go beyond simple preference. Like what kinds of reasons? Like situations where revealing the truth might hurt innocent people or destroy families unnecessarily, he said carefully. Sometimes keeping certain information private is actually the more ethical choice, even if it creates personal discomfort for the people involved. The conversation had moved into dangerous territory, with both of us speaking in coded language about secrets we couldn't acknowledge directly. I decided to push a little further to see how he would respond to more direct pressure. I've been thinking about that perspective, I said, and I'm not sure I agree with it anymore. I think we sometimes tell ourselves that we're protecting other people when we're really just protecting ourselves from difficult conversations or uncomfortable consequences. Marcus's expression tightened almost imperceptibly. What do you mean? I mean that it's easy to rationalize keeping secrets by claiming that revelation would hurt other people, when really we're afraid of how the truth might affect our own lives or reputations. The people we think we're protecting might actually be stronger and more capable of handling difficult truths than we give them credit for. And what if they're not? Marcus asked, his voice carrying a note of genuine anxiety. What if revealing certain truths really would destroy people's lives or harm innocent children? The reference to children was the closest he'd come to acknowledging the real subject of our conversation. Then I think those truths have a way of coming out eventually anyway, and the longer they're hidden, the more damage they cause when they're finally revealed. At least if people tell the truth voluntarily, they have some control over the timing and circumstances. Marcus was quiet for several minutes, apparently processing the implications of my perspective for his own situation. That's assuming that voluntary revelation is actually possible. Sometimes circumstances make it difficult or impossible to tell the truth without causing immediate and irreversible harm. Like what circumstances? He hesitated, clearly debating how much he could say without explicitly acknowledging his connection to baby Lily. Like situations where multiple families would be destroyed, where professional reputations would be ruined, where children might be traumatized by adult mistakes they had no role in creating. The litany of concerns revealed how thoroughly Marcus had convinced himself that maintaining his distance from baby Lily was the morally superior choice. Like Jessica, he'd created an elaborate justification for avoiding responsibility by framing his abandonment as a form of protection for everyone involved. Those are all serious concerns, I acknowledged. But they're also assumptions about how other people would react to difficult truths. What if the families involved are stronger than you think? What if the children deserve to know the truth about their parentage, regardless of how complicated that truth might be? And what if they're not, and they don't? Marcus countered. What if forcing these revelations destroys lives that could have been lived happily without this knowledge? The question crystallized the fundamental disagreement between us about the value of truth versus the comfort of ignorance. Marcus genuinely believed that Ryan and baby Lily would be better off never knowing about her true parentage, while I was increasingly convinced that secrets of this magnitude were ultimately more destructive than the truth could ever be. I think, I said carefully, that people deserve the opportunity to make informed decisions about their own lives, even when those decisions are difficult or painful. And I think children deserve to know the truth about their biological heritage, regardless of how complicated that truth might be for the adults involved. Marcus nodded slowly, though his expression suggested he wasn't entirely convinced by my arguments. That's a principled position, though I hope you'll consider that real-world applications of principles can be more complicated than theoretical discussions about moral philosophy. I've been considering that quite a lot lately, I replied. But I've also been thinking about the long-term consequences of maintaining deceptions that affect multiple families. Sometimes the short-term pain of honesty is preferable to the long-term damage of elaborate lies. The conversation ended without explicit acknowledgement of its true subject, but I could see in Marcus's expression that my arguments had affected him more than he wanted to admit. Whether that influence would translate into action remained to be seen, but I felt like I'd planted seeds that might eventually grow into a more responsible approach to his paternal obligations. Walking back to my office after lunch, I reflected on how much my perspective on family secrets had evolved since Jessica's confession 3 weeks earlier. The knowledge of baby Lily's true parentage had initially felt like a burden I didn't want to carry, but it was becoming a catalyst for examining my own relationship with honesty and deception in ways that felt ultimately constructive. The upcoming awards ceremony would force me to confront my own history of hiding professional achievements from family members, while the situation with Jessica and Marcus was pushing me to articulate clearer principles about the value of truth in family relationships. Neither challenge was comfortable, but both felt necessary for my own emotional growth and for the welfare of people I cared about. The question that remained was whether I could find a way to encourage honesty from others while modeling it myself, creating space for difficult truths to emerge, without forcing confrontations that might cause unnecessary damage to the innocent people caught in the crossfire of adult mistakes. The letter arrived on a Tuesday morning, delivered by certified mail to ensure I would receive it personally. The return address showed the law offices of Hartwell & Associates, a firm I recognized as specializing in family law and paternity cases. My hands trembled slightly as I signed for the delivery, already suspecting what information the envelope might contain. Inside was a formal laboratory report confirming what I had known for weeks through observation and intuition. Baby Lily's DNA analysis showed conclusively that Ryan Martinez was not her biological father, while a secondary test confirmed Marcus Chen's paternity with 99.7% accuracy. The documentation was thorough and legally admissible, suggesting that someone had been planning for potential custody or support proceedings. The accompanying letter was from Jessica's attorney, explaining that my sister had finally decided to pursue legal separation from Ryan and needed my testimony regarding the timeline of her relationship with Marcus. The formal tone of the correspondence contrasted sharply with Jessica's usual indirect communication style, suggesting that she had moved beyond emotional paralysis into decisive action. My phone rang before I could fully process the implications of receiving these documents. Jessica's voice was shaky but determined when I answered, carrying a quality I hadn't heard from her in months. "Did you get the papers?" she asked without preamble. "I just opened them." "Jessica, what happened? Last week you were still trying to figure out how to handle this situation, and now you're filing for legal separation?" "Ryan found out," she said simply. "Not about Marcus specifically, but he discovered that Lily isn't his biological daughter. He demanded a paternity test after his mother made some comments about the baby not looking like anyone in their family." The news hit me like a physical blow, even though I'd been expecting some version of this revelation for weeks. "When did this happen?" 3 days ago. He got the results yesterday and confronted me with them. I had to tell him about Marcus because he was threatening to take Lily away from me and claim I'd committed some kind of fraud by letting him believe he was her father. I could hear the exhaustion in Jessica's voice, the weight of months of deception finally lifting to reveal the complex legal and emotional aftermath underneath. "How did he react when you told him about Marcus?" "Exactly as badly as you'd expect. He called me every name you can imagine, threatened to ruin Marcus's career, said he was going to sue for full custody of Lily and make sure I never saw her again." Jessica's voice broke slightly. "He also said some things about you that I won't repeat, but basically blamed our entire family for enabling what he called my betrayal of our marriage." The mention of Ryan's attacks on me wasn't surprising, given his pattern of lashing out at perceived enemies when he felt threatened. But the idea that he might try to use custody of baby Lily as a weapon against Jessica created a new level of urgency around the situation. "Where are you staying? Are you and Lily safe?" "We're at Mom and Dad's house for now. Ryan changed the locks on our house and told me not to come back without a court order. My attorney says that's illegal since my name is on the deed, But I don't want to escalate the confrontation while we're still working out temporary custody arrangements. The practical details of Jessica's situation were clearly overwhelming, but they also represented progress from the paralysis that had characterized her approach to this problem for months. "What do you need from me?" The letter mentioned testimony about timelines. "My attorney wants to establish a clear record of when Marcus and I were involved and when Ryan was traveling for work during the conception period. You work with Marcus regularly, so you might have noticed changes in his behavior or schedule that could support our timeline. The request forced me to consider how much I wanted to become involved in the legal proceedings that would inevitably follow Jessica's revelation. Providing testimony would mean publicly acknowledging my awareness of the affair and potentially damaging my professional relationship with Marcus, who might view my cooperation with Jessica's attorney as a betrayal of his trust. I'll help however I can," I said, recognizing that my sister's welfare and baby Lily's future were more important than my own professional comfort. "But Jessica, what about Marcus? Is he going to step up and take responsibility for Lily now that everything's out in the open?" The long pause before Jessica answered told me everything I needed to know about Marcus's response to being exposed as baby Lily's biological father. He's been less than enthusiastic about the situation becoming public. His divorce from his wife was just finalized last month, and he's worried about how this will affect his custody arrangement with his own children. "His own children?" I repeated, shocked by this new information. "Marcus has other kids?" "2 sons, ages 8 and 10. He was worried that if his ex-wife found out about Lily, she might try to modify their custody agreement or use the affair as evidence that he's an unfit parent." The revelation that Marcus had been prioritizing his relationship with his legitimate children over his obligations to baby Lily added another layer of complexity to an already difficult situation. While I could understand his concern about protecting his established family relationships, his approach seemed to involve abandoning one child to preserve his connection to others. So he's planning to just walk away from Lily completely, even now that Ryan knows the truth. He says he'll provide financial support, if legally required, but he doesn't want to pursue visitation or custody rights because it would complicate his life too much. Jessica's voice carried a mixture of hurt and resignation that suggested she'd been hoping for a different response from her former lover. The conversation continued for another 20 minutes, with Jessica explaining the legal strategy her attorney had recommended and the timeline for various court proceedings that would determine baby Lily's custody and support arrangements. Throughout our discussion, I found myself thinking about Ryan's reaction to learning that he'd been unknowingly raising another man's child for 6 months. Despite his many character flaws and his history of cruelty toward me, Ryan had genuinely believed that baby Lily was his daughter, and had formed an emotional attachment to her that would now be severed by circumstances beyond his control. The revelation that she wasn't biologically his would likely devastate him in ways that went beyond simple embarrassment or anger about Jessica's infidelity. After ending the call with Jessica, I sat in my office trying to process the magnitude of how quickly the situation had escalated from private family secret to public legal proceeding. Within a matter of days, Ryan had gone from being a proud father to discovering that his entire family life was built on a foundation of deception, while Marcus had been forced to confront paternal responsibilities he'd been avoiding for months. The timing of these revelations was particularly significant, given that my own professional recognition was scheduled to become public within the next week. The American Society for Reproductive Medicine had issued a press release announcing my award, and several medical journals had already requested interviews about my research into unexplained infertility. The convergence of Jessica's family crisis with my own career milestone created a strange symmetry that felt almost cosmically arranged. My phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. "We need to talk. Can you meet me in the hospital parking garage level 3 at 6 p.m.? Marcus." The request for a clandestine meeting suggested that Marcus was finally ready to have a direct conversation about his role in the situation, rather than continuing to communicate through coded professional discussions. I texted back my agreement to meet him, curious about what he might say now that his secret had been exposed and he was facing potential legal consequences for his choices. The rest of the afternoon passed slowly as I tried to focus on patient consultations, while mentally preparing for what might be a difficult confrontation with a colleague I'd respected professionally, despite my growing awareness of his personal failings. The cognitive dissonance between Marcus's reputation as a skilled physician and his behavior as an absent father continued to challenge my assumptions about character and professional competence. At exactly 6 o'clock, I found Marcus waiting beside his car on the third level of the parking garage, looking haggard in a way I'd never seen during our professional interactions. His usually immaculate appearance was disheveled, his tie loosened, and his hair showing signs that he'd been running his hands through it repeatedly. "Thank you for coming," he said as I approached, his voice carrying a level of vulnerability that seemed entirely foreign to his usual confident demeanor. "I know this situation has become complicated for everyone involved, and I wanted to explain my perspective before you hear other versions of events." "I'm listening," I replied, leaning against the concrete wall while maintaining enough distance to signal that this wasn't a friendly conversation between colleagues. Marcus took a deep breath before beginning what sounded like a carefully rehearsed explanation. "I want you to understand that my relationship with Jessica was never intended to become serious or to result in pregnancy. We were both going through difficult periods in our marriages, and what happened between us was more about emotional support than romantic involvement." The characterization of their affair as emotional support rather than romantic involvement seemed like an attempt to minimize his responsibility for the consequences, but I didn't interrupt his narrative. When Jessica told me she was pregnant, we both agreed that the most responsible approach would be to let Ryan believe he was the father and avoid disrupting two families unnecessarily. I thought we were making a mature decision that would protect everyone involved, especially the child. "How exactly does abandoning your biological daughter protect her?" I asked, unable to keep the edge out of my voice. Marcus flinched at my directness. "I wasn't abandoning her. I was ensuring that she would have a stable home with parents who could provide for her without the complications that would come from revealed paternity. Ryan is financially successful and was committed to being a good father. I thought that was better for Lily than growing up in the middle of a custody battle between multiple families." "That wasn't your decision to make," I said firmly. "You don't get to unilaterally decide what's best for your child based on what's most convenient for your own life circumstances. You think I should have destroyed 2 marriages and traumatized multiple children just to satisfy some abstract principle about biological parentage?" Marcus asked, his defensive tone suggesting he'd been having similar arguments with other people recently. "I think you should have taken responsibility for your choices, instead of forcing Ryan to unknowingly raise your child, while you pretended the situation didn't exist." The conversation was becoming more heated than I'd intended, but months of watching Marcus maintain his facade of innocence, while Ryan struggled with fatherhood he'd never chosen, had built up considerable frustration that was now finding outlet. "And what about now?" I continued. "Ryan knows the truth. Jessica is filing for separation, and you still want to avoid taking responsibility for Lily's welfare. How is that protecting anyone except yourself?" Marcus ran his hands through his hair again, the gesture making him look younger and more uncertain than his usual professional persona suggested. "The situation has become more complicated than any of us anticipated. Ryan is threatening to sue for custody of Lily even though she's not biologically his, and my ex-wife is using this entire situation to challenge our custody arrangement for my sons. So you're prioritizing your relationship with your legitimate children over your obligations to Lily?" "I'm trying to minimize the damage to everyone involved," he corrected. "Getting into a public custody battle with Ryan would hurt Lily more than it would help her, and it would definitely damage my son's relationship with me at a time when they're already struggling with their parents' divorce." The rationalization revealed how thoroughly Marcus had convinced himself that his avoidance of responsibility was actually a form of selfless protection for all the children involved. He'd created an elaborate moral framework that allowed him to prioritize his own comfort while maintaining the illusion that he was acting in everyone's best interests. "Have you considered that Lily might want to know who her biological father is when she's older? That she might have medical questions or genetic concerns that only you can answer? That she might feel abandoned and confused when she discovers that her real father chose to have no relationship with her?" Marcus looked genuinely surprised by these questions, as if he'd never considered the long-term emotional implications of his decision for baby Lily herself. "I assumed that if she grew up with Ryan as her father, she would never need to know about the biological reality. Ryan could provide everything she needed without the complications that acknowledging my paternity would create. Except Ryan isn't going to be her father anymore. He's devastated and angry and probably never wants to see her again because she represents Jessica's betrayal of their marriage. So now Lily has no committed father figure at all, because you were too concerned about your own convenience to step up when she needed you. The accusation hit Marcus visibly, his face paling, as he apparently considered for the first time how his choices might affect baby Lily's future well-being. I didn't think about it that way. I assumed that even if Ryan found out the truth, he would still want to maintain a relationship with Lily because he'd been her father for 6 months. People aren't that rational when they discover they've been massively deceived by someone they trusted. Ryan's attachment to Lily was based on believing she was his biological daughter. Now that he knows she isn't, that attachment has been contaminated by feelings of betrayal and humiliation that might make it impossible for him to continue caring for her. Marcus was quiet for several minutes, apparently processing implications he hadn't previously considered. So what do you think I should do now? The situation is already public, the legal proceedings have started, and everyone involved is angry or hurt or both. I think you should start by acknowledging your responsibility to Lily and figure out how to be a real father to her instead of a reluctant financial contributor. She's going to need stability and commitment from someone who actually wants her in their life. And you think that person should be me? I think you're her biological father, and you participated in creating this situation, so yes, you have obligations to her that you can't avoid just because fulfilling them is inconvenient. Marcus nodded slowly, though his expression suggested he was still struggling with the concept of active paternal involvement. It's not just about convenience, Emma. I genuinely don't know how to be a father to a child I haven't been involved with from birth. My relationship with my sons developed naturally over years of daily interaction. I can't just suddenly become Lily's father because the legal situation has changed. You can start by trying. You can learn about her personality and her needs and her routine. You can show up consistently and demonstrate that she matters to you as a person rather than just as a legal obligation. The suggestion seemed to overwhelm Marcus, who clearly hadn't considered the practical aspects of developing a relationship with baby Lily. And what about Ryan? He's threatening to fight for custody, even though he's not her biological father. How do I compete with someone who's already bonded with her and has significantly more resources than I do? You don't compete with Ryan. You focus on being the best father you can be to Lily, and let the legal system determine custody arrangements based on her best interests, rather than the adult's preferences. The conversation continued for another 30 minutes, with Marcus asking increasingly specific questions about how to navigate the practical and emotional challenges of sudden fatherhood. His anxiety about the situation was genuine, though it seemed to be motivated more by fear of failure than by concern for baby Lily's well-being. As we prepared to leave the parking garage, Marcus asked a question that revealed how much the exposure of his secret had affected his broader perspective on honesty and responsibility. Do you regret keeping your own professional achievements secret from your family? Now that everything's coming out anyway, do you wish you'd been more honest from the beginning? The question caught me off guard, though I recognized the parallel he was drawing between his situation and my own history of maintaining separate personal and professional identities. I'm starting to think that secrets create more problems than they solve, even when the initial motivation for keeping them seems reasonable. And you think honesty is always better, regardless of the short-term pain it might cause? I think children deserve the truth about their parentage, and adults deserve the opportunity to make informed decisions about their relationships. Beyond that, I'm still figuring out my own principles about when honesty is worth the cost and when discretion might be more compassionate. Marcus nodded thoughtfully. Well, I suppose we're both going to have opportunities to test those principles in the coming weeks. The observation was accurate in ways that felt almost prophetic. My professional recognition was scheduled to become public within days, forcing me to confront my family's reactions to learning about achievements I'd hidden for years. Meanwhile, Marcus would be navigating the legal and emotional complexities of claiming paternal responsibility for a child he'd abandoned while attempting to maintain relationships with his other children, who might view his behavior as evidence of poor character. Driving home that evening, I reflected on how the revelation of baby Lily's true parentage had created a cascade of consequences that were affecting everyone in our extended family network. Jessica was facing divorce proceedings and potential custody battles while trying to rebuild her life as a single mother. Ryan was dealing with the devastation of learning that his marriage and fatherhood had been based on deception, Marcus was being forced to confront responsibilities he'd been avoiding while managing the impact on his other relationships. Even my parents were being drawn into the situation as they provided temporary housing and emotional support for Jessica, while trying to understand how their daughter's marriage had deteriorated so dramatically without their awareness. The ripple effects of secrets and deception were proving to extend far beyond the original participants, in ways that none of us had anticipated. The next morning brought an unexpected development that would accelerate the timeline for my own revelations about professional success. Dr. Patricia Miller called me into her office to inform me that a reporter from the Los Angeles Times was interested in doing a feature story about my award and research, with particular focus on how my work was revolutionizing treatment approaches for couples struggling with unexplained infertility. This could be significant exposure for both you personally and for our hospital's reproductive medicine program, Dr. Miller explained. The reporter wants to interview you this afternoon and potentially visit your home to get some personal background about your journey into fertility research. The prospect of a newspaper reporter visiting my house and potentially speaking with neighbors or family members about my professional achievements created immediate anxiety about maintaining the separation between my public and private identities. Dr. Miller, I should mention that my family isn't aware of the scope of my professional recognition. This interview could create some personal complications if they find out about my achievements through media coverage rather than direct communication. Dr. Miller looked surprised by this revelation. You haven't told your family about the award? Emma, this is a tremendous honor that reflects years of groundbreaking research. Why would you keep something like this private? The question forced me to articulate reasoning that had seemed logical in my own mind but sounded increasingly questionable when explained to someone else. It's complicated family dynamics involving expectations and relationships that I've been trying to manage carefully. But I recognize that I can't control media coverage, so I'll need to have some difficult conversations with relatives before this story is published. I'd recommend handling that today if possible. The reporter will likely want to speak with family members about your background and personal motivation for entering reproductive medicine. If they're caught off guard by learning about your achievements for the first time, their reactions might not be what you'd want included in a major newspaper article. The practical advice highlighted how my personal choices about family communication were now creating professional complications that could affect my career trajectory and the hospital's reputation. The convergence of private decisions and public consequences was becoming impossible to manage through careful compartmentalization. I spent my lunch break calling each family member to arrange emergency conversations about my professional achievements before the newspaper interview took place. The rushed timeline for these revelations wasn't ideal, but it was preferable to having relatives discover my success through reading about it in the Los Angeles Times. My parents reacted with characteristic pride and excitement, though they expressed frustration about learning such important news under pressure rather than through a celebratory family dinner. Jessica was supportive but distracted by her own legal proceedings, while David was simply relieved that I was finally being honest about achievements I'd worked so hard to earn. The most challenging conversation was with Ryan, who answered my call with obvious suspicion about why I would contact him directly during his marital crisis. When I explained about the award and upcoming media coverage, his response was a mixture of disbelief and what sounded like grudging respect. So you're telling me that while I've been thinking of you as the family disappointment who can't even get pregnant, you've actually been some kind of famous fertility expert helping other people have babies? The crude summary of the situation was typical of Ryan's communication style, but it also captured the essential irony that had been developing for months without his awareness. I'm a reproductive endocrinologist who specializes in treating unexplained infertility. The award recognizes research that has helped hundreds of couples start families over the past several years. Ryan was quiet for a long moment, apparently processing how dramatically this information changed his understanding of my professional status and capabilities. And you never mentioned this because? Because I wanted our family relationships to be based on personal connections, rather than professional achievements or financial success. Financial success? Ryan repeated, his voice carrying a note of genuine curiosity for the first time in our conversation. The research work has been lucrative, as well as professionally rewarding. I've been fortunate to build a successful practice while contributing to advances in fertility treatment. The euphemistic way I described my financial situation was deliberate, allowing Ryan to draw his own conclusions about my economic status without providing specific details that might create additional complications. "Well," Ryan said finally, his tone carrying a mixture of surprise and what might have been grudging admiration, "I guess I owe you an apology for some of the things I've said about your career over the years." The unexpected acknowledgement of his past behavior was more than I'd anticipated from someone who rarely admitted mistakes or showed vulnerability. "Thank you for saying that, Ryan. I know you're dealing with a lot right now with your own situation." "Yeah, well, apparently everyone in this family has been keeping secrets that are bigger than they initially appeared." The observation was accurate in ways that felt almost philosophical. Both Jessica and I had been maintaining elaborate deceptions about fundamental aspects of our lives, while Ryan had been unknowingly living within the framework of lies that others had constructed around him. The revelation of these secrets was forcing all of us to reconsider our assumptions about family relationships and the price of maintaining separate public and private identities. The afternoon interview with the Los Angeles Times reporter went smoothly, with most questions focusing on my research methodology and the clinical implications of my findings rather than personal details about my family background. The reporter seemed satisfied with brief explanations about my educational background and motivation for entering reproductive medicine without delving into the complexities of my private life. However, the experience of discussing my professional achievements openly with a journalist highlighted how much energy I'd been expending over the years to maintain artificial boundaries between different aspects of my identity. The relief of being able to speak honestly about my work and its impact was immediate and profound, suggesting that the psychological cost of compartmentalization had been higher than I'd realized. That evening, David and I sat in our living room discussing the rapid pace of revelations that were transforming our family dynamics in real time. The convergence of Jessica's marital crisis with my professional recognition was creating opportunities for unprecedented honesty between family members who had been maintaining careful facades for years. "Do you think Ryan will actually change how he treats you now that he knows about your success?" David asked as we reviewed the events of the day. "I think Ryan's behavior toward me was always more about his own insecurities than about my actual circumstances. Learning that I'm professionally successful might make him more respectful in the short term, but it won't address the underlying character issues that made him cruel in the first place." "And what about Marcus? Do you think he'll actually step up and take responsibility for Lily now that everything's public?" The question highlighted my ongoing uncertainty about whether Marcus possessed the emotional maturity to transition from reluctant biological father to committed parent. "I think he'll do whatever the legal system requires him to do in terms of financial support, but I'm not sure he's capable of providing the kind of emotional commitment that Lily actually needs. That's heartbreaking for her. She's going to grow up knowing that her biological father was available but chose not to be fully involved in her life." The observation captured what I considered the most tragic aspect of the entire situation. Baby Lily would eventually understand that her parentage had been a source of conflict and deception among the adults who were supposed to protect her, and that knowledge would likely affect her sense of self-worth and trust in family relationships. As we prepared for bed that night, I found myself thinking about the newspaper article that would be published within the next few days and how it would permanently alter my public identity within our community. The careful balance I'd maintained between professional achievement and personal privacy was about to be destroyed, forcing me to integrate different aspects of my life in ways that felt both terrifying and liberating. The conversation with Ryan had suggested that honesty about my success might actually improve some family relationships by eliminating the artificial power dynamics that had been based on incorrect assumptions about my circumstances. But it would also create new pressures and expectations that I'd been avoiding by maintaining my previous level of privacy. Tomorrow would bring additional developments in Jessica's legal proceedings, and potentially more conversations with Marcus about his paternal responsibilities. The momentum of revelation and consequence was accelerating beyond anyone's ability to control, creating a sense that we were all approaching some kind of inevitable reckoning with the choices we'd made and the secrets we'd maintained. The Los Angeles Times article was published on a Sunday morning, accompanied by a photograph of me in my laboratory coat standing beside state-of-the-art fertility equipment that most people in Riverside had never seen before. The headline read, "Local doctors' breakthrough research offers hope to thousands of couples struggling with infertility," and the article detailed my innovative treatment protocols, that had revolutionized care for patients with unexplained reproductive challenges. By 10 o'clock that morning, my phone was ringing constantly with calls from colleagues, former patients, and community members who had never known that the quiet woman they occasionally encountered at family gatherings was actually one of the region's most respected fertility specialists. The disconnect between my public and private personas had been so complete that even our neighbors expressed shock at discovering my professional identity. Jessica called around noon, her voice carrying a mixture of pride and exhaustion. "I saw the article, Emma. I can't believe how incredible your work sounds when it's described properly, instead of just being dismissed as, quote, quote. I'm so proud of you, and I'm sorry that our family drama is overshadowing your moment of recognition." The generosity of her response was particularly meaningful given that she was simultaneously dealing with custody negotiations and divorce proceedings that were consuming most of her emotional energy. "Thank you, Jess. How are things progressing with your legal situation?" "Better than expected, actually. Ryan's attorney contacted mine yesterday with a settlement proposal that would give me primary custody of Lily while allowing him supervised visitation if he wants it. Apparently, learning about your success made him reconsider some of his assumptions about our family's character and capabilities. The news that my professional revelation had somehow influenced Ryan's approach to custody negotiations was unexpected but welcome." "What kind of assumptions?" "He told his lawyer that he'd underestimated the women in our family, and realized that if you could build such a successful career while dealing with fertility challenges, maybe I was stronger and more capable than he'd given me credit for. It's a backhanded compliment, but it's also the first time he's acknowledged that his treatment of both of us might have been unfair." The conversation continued for another 20 minutes, with Jessica explaining how the custody arrangement would work and what role Marcus had agreed to play in Lily's upbringing. The legal proceedings had apparently forced him to confront his parental responsibilities in ways that our previous conversations had only begun to address. Marcus has agreed to regular visitation and financial support, but he's also requesting family counseling to help him figure out how to develop a relationship with Lily, Jessica explained. His ex-wife was surprisingly supportive once she understood the full situation, and she's even offered to help coordinate schedules so that Lily can spend time with her half-brothers when Marcus has custody. The resolution was more positive than I'd dared to hope for, suggesting that forced honesty about difficult family situations might sometimes lead to better outcomes than continued deception. While the process had been painful for everyone involved, baby Lily would ultimately grow up with clarity about her parentage and access to relationships with all the adults who cared about her welfare. Later that afternoon, Ryan appeared at my front door carrying a bouquet of flowers and wearing an expression of genuine remorse that I'd never seen from him before. David answered the door but called for me immediately, recognizing that this conversation needed to happen between Ryan and me directly. "I came to apologize," Ryan said without preamble as I joined them on the front porch. "Not just for what I said at the christening, but for years of treating you like you were somehow less successful or capable than the rest of us. Reading about your achievements in the newspaper made me realize how completely wrong I've been about who you are and what you've accomplished." The directness of his apology was startling, particularly coming from someone who typically avoided admitting mistakes or showing vulnerability. "I appreciate that, Ryan. It takes character to acknowledge when you've misjudged someone." "I don't know about character," he replied with bitter humor. "I think it takes having your own life fall apart to recognize that you might have been wrong about other people's lives too." Finding out that Lily isn't my daughter, and that Jessica had been lying to me for months, made me question everything I thought I knew about family relationships. The admission revealed how thoroughly the revelation about baby Lily's parentage had shaken Ryan's confidence in his own judgment and perceptions. "How are you handling everything with Jessica and the custody situation?" "Better than I expected, honestly. Once the initial anger wore off, I realized that I love Lily regardless of who her biological father is. She's been my daughter for 6 months, and those feelings don't just disappear because of DNA test results." Ryan's voice softened as he spoke about baby Lily. "I want to remain part of her life if Jessica will allow it, though I understand why she might prefer a clean break." The emotional maturity Ryan was displaying seemed genuine, though I wondered how sustainable it would be once the immediate crisis had passed. "What about Marcus? Are you comfortable with him being involved in Lily's upbringing?" "I'm not comfortable with it, but I recognize that it's necessary for Lily's well-being." She deserves to know her biological father and to have access to both sides of her genetic heritage. Ryan paused, apparently struggling with more difficult admissions. I also recognized that Marcus didn't pursue the situation maliciously. He and Jessica made poor choices, but they weren't trying to hurt me specifically. The conversation continued for another hour, with Ryan asking thoughtful questions about my research and expressing genuine interest in understanding my professional achievements. The contrast between this version of my brother-in-law and the cruel man who had attacked me at the christening was so dramatic that it felt like speaking with an entirely different person. As Ryan prepared to leave, he made one final observation that captured the essential transformation that had occurred within our family dynamics. You know what's strange about all of this? Learning the truth about everyone's secrets has actually made me feel closer to your family than I ever did when we were all pretending to be perfect. At least now I know who you all really are, instead of trying to live up to some impossible standard. The insight was remarkably perceptive for someone who had previously seemed incapable of emotional depth or self-reflection. The crisis had apparently forced Ryan to examine his own behavior and motivations in ways that had led to genuine personal growth. 3 months later, I stood in my laboratory at Riverside General Hospital preparing for a television interview about my latest research findings. The media attention following the Los Angeles Times article had generated interest from medical journalists across the country, and my work was being featured in a documentary about advances in fertility treatment. The professional recognition had transformed my daily life in ways both expected and surprising. Patients now sought me out specifically because of my reputation, leading to a waiting list that extended several months into the future. Speaking engagements and research collaborations had multiplied, requiring me to hire additional staff and expand my practice beyond what I'd previously thought possible. More importantly, the integration of my professional and personal identities had eliminated the exhausting psychological burden of maintaining separate personas for different audiences. Family gatherings had become genuinely enjoyable as relatives expressed interest in my work and celebrated achievements they could finally acknowledge openly. Jessica had successfully navigated her divorce proceedings and was thriving as a single mother with shared custody arrangements that allowed both Ryan and Marcus to maintain relationships with baby Lily. The little girl was developing into a confident, happy child who seemed to benefit from having multiple adults committed to her welfare, rather than being damaged by the complicated circumstances of her parentage. Marcus had surprised everyone by embracing his paternal role with unexpected enthusiasm once he'd overcome his initial reluctance. His relationship with Lily was growing stronger each month, and he'd even begun integrating her into activities with his sons from his previous marriage. The blended family arrangement was unconventional but functional, proving that honesty about difficult situations could sometimes lead to creative solutions that worked better than traditional approaches. Even my relationship with Ryan had evolved into something approaching genuine friendship, based on mutual respect rather than the artificial politeness that had characterized our previous interactions. His personal growth following the revelation about baby Lily's parentage had been remarkable, transforming him from someone I'd actively avoided into a family member I actually enjoyed spending time with. As I prepared for the television interview, I reflected on how the events that had begun with Ryan's cruel attack on my fertility struggles had ultimately led to positive transformations for everyone involved. The exposure of family secrets had been painful initially, but it had also created opportunities for authentic relationships based on truth rather than carefully maintained deceptions. The producer finished, adjusting my microphone, and signaled that filming would begin in 30 seconds. I took a deep breath and prepared to discuss my research with millions of viewers who would see me as Dr. Emma Richardson, reproductive endocrinologist and award-winning fertility specialist, rather than the struggling family disappointment I'd once allowed myself to be perceived as. The irony wasn't lost on me that Ryan's attempt to humiliate me by highlighting my inability to conceive had ultimately led to revelations that exposed him as the one living a life built on false foundations. But more importantly, his cruelty had catalyzed changes that improved everyone's circumstances, proving that sometimes the most painful moments can become turning points toward better futures. As the camera began rolling and I started explaining my revolutionary treatment protocols to a national audience, I thought about baby Lily growing up with clarity about her identity and access to all the adults who loved her. The little girl who had been at the center of so much deception and conflict was now thriving in an environment of unprecedented honesty and commitment from multiple parental figures. The transformation hadn't been easy for any of us, but it had been worth every difficult conversation and painful revelation. Sometimes the truth really does set you free, even when the liberation comes at a price that initially seems too high to pay. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.